Hey everybody, welcome to this video. We are going to look at what is the method in context question, and this tutorial is going to give you a brief introduction, some important things to consider and some example paragraphs to get you started. What is it and where will I see this question? So this is a method in context question, and it is a question on paper 1, full A-level paper, question 5, and it is an essay that is worth 20 marks. So you would spend 30 minutes on this answer, and the instruction is to use the item for hooks as well as give the strengths and weaknesses of the method, but the main focus is to apply to the context of education. So here is an example of question 5, methods in context. It is from paper 1. This example is from 2022 and it is worth 20 marks, and the question is asking you apply material from the item C and your knowledge of research methods, evaluate the strengths and limitations of using group interviews to investigate the reasons for subject choices made by pupils. So the question is giving you some instructions that you need to use. So you've got to start with the item. Now the item on this question is usually quite big and chunky because they split the two paragraphs into the two different parts of the question. So part of the question is about subject choice. So part of the item tells you about what subject choice is and some hints and tips of things that you could be writing about. The second part of the item is about the method. So in this case, it's giving you a little bit of info about group interviews and some possible strengths and weaknesses that you could be writing about. And you've got to remember that this question is asking you to evaluate the strengths and limitations of this method. So you're thinking about your practical, your ethical and your theoretical strengths and limitations. So the question like this might look really daunting, but it's not. So just to put it really simply, you've just got to give some strengths and weaknesses of the method. Make sure you've got your practical, ethical, theoretical at some point in your answer. And as you go along, apply them to the school context. I want you to imagine that you are the researcher and you're considering some of the issues, the barriers that you might face when you're researching in a school. And I want you to then link it to the concept or the idea that is in the question. So students will need to answer this question, and you'll need to consider the following: the characteristics of the people, the groups, the students, the teachers that are being studied, and how their characteristics are going to impact your research. So for example, parents. So not all parents are the same. So middle class parents, they've got this pro-school attitude. They're very enthusiastic about the child's education. So they're going to be more than happy to take part in research for you. Whereas working class parents might have different barriers. They might not be able to take part in an interview, for example, because they work long hours. Or ethnic minorities, they might not have English as a first language. So that might provide a barrier to taking part in your research. The same with students. So some students are pro-school, they're going to be absolutely ecstatic. They're going to volunteer to take part in your research, and they're going to be very enthusiastic, and they're going to give you lots of pleasing responses. Okay. Whereas anti-school students, they're not going to do homework, so they're definitely not going to take part in your research. And other people, so you could research attendance officers, careers advisors, teaching assistants, head teachers, and they're all going to have some characteristics that make them want to take part in your research or provide a barrier that might make researching them really difficult. So here is my example number 1 of looking at how we might answer a question like this. So this question was asking about observations of racism within a school. So you would start off by saying the ethical strength of using observation is that if it's overt, you've gained consent. However, in a school context, it might be difficult as you might need permission of the head teacher to gain access to observe them. And then you might want to explain it a little bit more and why the head teacher might refuse, thinking about the context in the question. So the context is racism. So the school might have had issues with racism in the past, or attitudes towards ethnic groups may have been negative, and that might make the school look bad. And this is because of marketisation and images the school portrays. Racism will put potential parents off, so the head teacher might refuse permission. And if you do get permission to observe lessons, some teachers, possibly the ones that might act in a racist way, might refuse consent to being observed. It's their place of work. They want to protect their image as a good teacher, and they might not want to disclose that they're being discriminative towards students in any negative way. Okay, so hopefully that's given you some ideas about how you might answer a question using observation of racism. So let's have a look at example number 2. So this one is about questionnaires of the role of parents in their child's achievement in school. So the biggest problem, I suppose, of using questionnaires is low response rate, because people throw them away, they ignore them, because there's no face-to-face contact with the researcher. You're under no obligation to fill it in. So I like what the student does here, because they use the sentence in the context of parental support. It's a lovely signpost to the examiner. Look, I am answering your question. There are some parents that might work full-time, so there's some characteristics. They don't have the time to complete them, or parents that don't care about their child's achievements might be unwilling to complete a questionnaire. So that's why there is a low response rate. So you've put it in the context. And this may be true of parents that have had their own education might be low, or they're embarrassed because they don't support their children and their children are underachieving, and they don't care enough about their child's education to complete it. And then the impact of this is that your questionnaire is going to lack representative data, because those that do reply are most likely to be parents who are more interested in their child's education, and they're likely to have high achievement as well. So there is example number 2. Let's have a look at example number 3. So this one is about participant observation to investigate pupil exclusions. So a problem with becoming a participant observer in a school, and there is the potential that you could, there is potential danger, especially if you're researching pupil exclusions, and think about what them students are going to be like, those that are going to be excluded. So for example, a participant observer in the school context may take the role of a teaching assistant who's observing while being an active part of the classroom. So by being a participant observation, they might be at risk of injury, because students that are typically excluded might be the result of assaulting a member of staff. And as this is the group that you are studying, they are going to be at a greater risk. Additionally, if the participant observation is overt, and you can abbreviate as long as you've wrote it in full, the pupil knows that they're being watched, and they might be frustrated, they might be under feelings of aggression because they feel like they're being judged by the observers in the classroom. So there are 3 different examples of how you are thinking about the strengths and weaknesses of the methods that you are studying, and how you might apply them to different contexts that you might be asked in that question 5, methods in context. So to summarise, how might you structure a main paragraph? Start by giving something about the method, so make it very explicit that you're giving a strength or a weakness. Signpost it, say this is a practical one, this is an ethical one, to make sure that you've got a good coverage of a range of different strengths and limitations throughout your answer. So for example, you might say an ethical strength for this method is, and explain why. Then make sure that you mention something about a school context. In the examples that I give, they clearly said in the school context, this is what the barrier might be, and linking it to the issue or the context in the question. So we've looked at racism in school, or pupil exclusions, or subject choice. So you could use those words in your answer in the context of racism or in the context of pupil exclusions, and then you can explain it a bit more and be explicit to a social group, so your teachers, your pupils, your parents, what their characteristics are and why is that providing a barrier to your research. And you can then talk about the long-term effect of it. Does it limit the validity, for example, or the representativeness? So as a bit of a follow-up, of this, you can consider the different places that, for example, observation might take place, or where you might be doing a questionnaire, or if you were doing an interview. Consider the different people who might be observed, questioned, and so on. Think about the different situations that you might be observing or doing an interview, or doing a group observation or a field experiment. So for example, it might be in school, it might be after school, it might be during lunch times, and so on. And other issues you can bring in is things like Hawthorne effect, guilty knowledge, right answerism, those types of things. And I've also got other videos on the methods in context, which shows you a range of different examples, different contexts that you might be studying, just to help you with answering these questions. Okay, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this useful. If you like it, click that like button. If you've got any questions, please leave a comment. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.